What's up guys, my name is Ace, and yesterday, November 13th, we got another massive update to Black Ops 4, and this was a really good one in my opinion. There were a ton of changes, including finally a proper SMG buff, and today we're going to be going over all of the important details of this update. Keep in mind, as always, the patch notes will be linked in the description below, so if you guys are interested in checking out every little minor detail, be sure to do that, because in my videos, I obviously can't cover every single note that was in this patch note. I'm going to be focusing on the more important things that directly affect gameplay. So just getting the basics out of the way, Nuketown was added. We knew this one was coming, so no big surprise there. Also, Blackjack's shop is now online, so you can directly purchase cosmetic items with COD points with this if you're interested. I'm personally not interested in that at all. And also, they implemented daily tier skips for that tier system, the contraband system, where all you have to do is either win a game of multiplayer or get some merits in some way in Blackout. So you could just log into a game of Blackout, get a kill, and then just die and end the game there. If you do that every single day, you can do that once, and it will allow you to skip one of your contraband tiers, which will help our progress along quite a bit with those tiers, but I don't know if it's quite enough yet. We'll have to wait and see how things settle out over time. And that's pretty much it for that introductory sort of stuff. Now let's get into the actual balancing changes. So the first thing we're going to be covering today are the SMGs. They finally got the buff that they've needed since launch. This is what we've been asking for, or at least partially what I've been asking for. A bunch of the SMGs finally have a 5-shot kill range, and therefore they finally have a competitive time to kill up close against assault rifles, because before this update, many of the assault rifles had a statistically better time to kill than all of the SMGs with the exception of the Spitfire at point blank range, which is a little bit strange because the SMGs should be the dominant ones up close. So first up, let's have a look at the MX-9. They say in the patch notes that they adjusted the 5-hit kill range up to 6 meters, but what they really mean is they added that 5-shot kill range, because before this update, there was no 5-shot kill range. It was 6 shots to kill at point blank range. So now we have a 6-meter 5-hit kill range with the MX-9, which is really nice. So if you get into those really close situations, you are going to absolutely dominate assault rifles. Next, we have the GKS. With this one, they added a 3-meter 5-hit kill range, so not quite as good as the MX-9, but the GKS has a lot of other strong points, like it's extremely accurate, so I think at least to begin with, a 3-meter 5-shot kill range is a good start. Also with the GKS, we have another very subtle change that wasn't mentioned in the patch notes, and this only affects hardcore game modes. Essentially what they did is they added a 27 damage range instead of that 28 damage range, and this allows them to control the drop-off point to a 2-shot kill within hardcore modes. Pre-patch for the past weekend or so, because this was a recent update to hardcore, the GKS would get a 37.5 meter one-shot kill, which was pretty insane for an SMG. That has been essentially cut in half down to about 19 meters. And I think this was a fair and balanced change. The GKS was miles better than any of the other SMGs in hardcore, and it is still an excellent gun in hardcore modes. So don't let this turn you off from it. It's just definitely going to be weaker than it was this past weekend. As for the Cordite, they also added a 3-meter 5-shot kill range to this, and I feel like that helps the Cordite out a lot because I really like getting into those really close quarter situations with the Cordite because that has a decently high fire rate, and now if I get point blank and I'm hip firing at people, I can really kill them quickly with that 3-meter 5-shot kill range. As for the Spitfire, they didn't give it a 5-hit kill range, and I think that's okay because it's got an extremely fast fire rate and therefore a pretty decent time to kill. What they did instead is they increased the 6-shot kill potential by 3 meters, which is somewhat noticeable, and this was a nice change to the Spitfire in my opinion. That just leaves us with the SOG 9mm, and they didn't actually touch the SOG at all. The SOG is exactly the same as it was before this patch, and again, I think that's alright, because I think that is the one SMG that was okay before this patch. It was the one really good, usable SMG, so I really didn't feel like it needed too much work. So these are the new updated SMG ranges in Black Ops 4 multiplayer, and it's looking a whole lot better than it was before. That's not to say that they might not need more tweaks in the future, because they might, but at least my initial impression was this is definitely a good update to the SMGs. In addition to that, for all of the SMGs, with the exception of the SOG 9mm, they slightly increased the aim down sight movement speed, so your ability to strafe while aiming down sight has improved. Unfortunately, before this update, I didn't have any pre-patch values for this, so I have nothing to compare it to, but I can tell you the post-patch aim down sight strafe speed for SMGs is now 80%, which is very significantly faster than the assault rifles, tactical rifles, and LMGs. So hopefully now, after this update, the SMGs will gain a little bit more of a place in this game, because up until now, the game has really been dominated by assault rifles, LMGs, and tactical rifles. So moving into the assault rifle category, the Maddox got a slight nerf when it comes to the recoil of its first and third shot, so it's supposed to have a little bit more recoil when you first start shooting at an enemy. Personally, since this update, I haven't noticed any difference whatsoever with the Maddox, so I would say this gun is still one of the best in the game, and this nerf didn't really do much to change that. As for the Echo Fire Operator mod for the Maddox, they actually buffed this a little bit. They removed any sort of recoil penalty that it used to have before. And when you look at it side by side, you can see that it definitely has less recoil than before, but there's still a relatively significant amount of recoil while using this operator mod. This brings us to the Can 57, and with this, they reduced the idle sway on it very significantly, actually. When you look at them side by side, it is a big difference, and this is definitely going to affect your ability to hit your first shot at longer ranges. This is an excellent buff for both core as well as hardcore game modes, and I think that's going to help the Can 57 out quite a bit. In addition to that, they very slightly increased its 4-shot kill potential within core modes by 1.5 meters, which is such a minor change you probably won't even notice that difference, but overall the Can 57 has improved slightly with this update. Moving on to the Rampart, just like with the Can 57, they reduced the idle sway here, and once again, it is a very noticeable difference. This is going to help the Rampart out quite a bit when it comes to that first shot accuracy, which is awesome in my opinion, because I really didn't like the feel of the Rampart before this update. I realized that it had a lot of potential, and it's quite powerful, especially with high caliber 1 and 2, but the idle sway as well as the initial recoil would always get me. And this brings me to the next buff to the Rampart, and this is the recoil between the first and third shot. With this initial recoil, they've actually reduced that, so it should be much more consistent and much more accurate at hitting your first few shots. And therefore, I would say this was a relatively big buff to the Rampart 17. Now, this slight buff doesn't mean that you still won't run into some of those situations where that second shot goes up and over his head, because it is still somewhat unpredictable. You should just be able to see a bit more consistency with the Rampart 17. Now, in addition to the idle sway and recoil buff to the Rampart, we also got a little bit of a range buff. They increased its 4-hit kill range by 3 meters, which once again, this isn't going to be a super noticeable change by any means whatsoever, but overall the Rampart 17 has improved fairly significantly when you combine all of these buffs together. This brings us to the tactical rifles, and quite surprisingly, the Swordfish got a few buffs. Not the ABR, which I thought would get some buffs, it was actually the Swordfish. With this, they slightly reduced the delay between each burst, and in my testing, keep in mind I test at 60 frames per second because that's what the game runs at on console, there realistically isn't a noticeable change between your burst delay. However, the bursts are slightly more consistent. So before, with frame rounding, sometimes it took 1 frame longer or 1 frame shorter between each burst. Now it's much more consistent, but realistically speaking, your statistical time to kill is going to be the same with the Swordfish, at least on the console version of the game at 60 FPS. We'll get into a lot more details on its time to kill and all that kind of stuff in the gun guide, which is coming very, very soon for the Swordfish. It's already all pretty much put together, so within the next day or two, we will have a gun guide on that. So in addition to that buff, they also reduced the idle sway for the Swordfish, and this reduction wasn't quite as noticeable as the Can 57 or the Rampart, but you can definitely tell that the idle sway isn't quite as bad as it was before. And also, with its operator mod, the Pentaburst, it now implements a standard burst delay. And once again, when I broke it down frame by frame, I didn't see any realistic difference here. So on console, you probably won't even notice this difference at all. But they did make some small adjustment to the burst delay with the Pentaburst. Quite surprisingly, that was the only tactical rifle that was touched with this update. I honestly thought the Swordfish before this update was quite good, and it was the ABR that needed a buff, but they didn't touch anything with the ABR, at least not yet. I still think we will see something on that in the future, though. This brings us to the LMG category, and the Titan got some pretty noticeable nerfs. First up, its aim down sight as well as its sprint out time were both nerfed quite noticeably. Pre-patched, the aim down sight and sprint out time for the Titan were both 300 milliseconds. Now they've been reduced down to 350 milliseconds. So you will notice that you can't snap on a target quite as fast with the Titan. And also they did increase the hipfire spread. As you can see here, it was a relatively noticeable increase to your hipfire spread. And also they slightly reduced the effectiveness of stock on the Titans, so you get a slightly lower aim down sight movement speed while using the stock attachment. Again, unfortunately, I don't have any pre-patch data on this, but currently our aim down sight stray speed with the stock attachment on the Titan is now 59%. Moving into the sniper category, unfortunately, I have no pre-patch data whatsoever on the sniper rifles. I just haven't gotten any time to get to them, but I will let you guys know what happened to the sniper rifles. With the Outlaw, it got quite a few buffs, which I think is definitely needed, especially for core game modes. The Outlaw was pretty terrible before this update, so hopefully this makes it a little bit better. With this, they slightly increased the fire rate, they greatly reduced the idle sway, they increased its aim down sight speed, they updated the aim down sight rechamber animation to make it easier to stay on target, the recoil for it will recenter more reliably, and they also increased the base damage by 10, but this doesn't affect your one-shot kill areas. All this does is it affects your ability to kill somebody that's already damaged in multiplayer. As for the STM, they added aim assist while hip firing to the console build of the game. I don't really have any experience with the STM, but I have heard some complaints about a lack of aim assist with that because it is a 2-shot kill sniper rifle, not a 1-shot kill. So now you do get aim assist while hip firing. And finally, for the sniper rifles, the Koshka got a bit of a buff. The recoil will now center more reliably after the first shot. So once again, when you fire that shot, it will recenter a little bit faster and a little bit more consistently. So the final weapon that was touched within this balancing update was the SG-12's operator mod, which is that strobe light, which if you guys remember a week or two ago, I made a video talking about the strobe light and how it was a pretty big issue, at least for the console build of the game. They have nerfed it a bit, and what they did is they reduced the visual effect of the strobe light operator mod, which let's have a look at before and after. This is what before looked like. It really blinded you quite a bit. It was very bright and very difficult to see the person behind the light in a lot of situations. Post-patch, it's looking a lot more reasonable. It's still kind of jarring, it still throws you off a little bit, and it still will give you an advantage in the gunfight when you have that strobe light, but I think it's a lot more reasonable in its current state when it comes to the visual effect of that strobe light. In addition to this is a big one. They reduced the range at which the strobe light will affect your aim assist by 50%. So before this update, even if you weren't getting flashed by the strobe light, so even if it wasn't actively flashing you, it could still disable your aim assist out to a really solid range. Here is the post-patch range at which the strobe light will turn off your aim assist for the console build of the game. If you get any closer to this, you will have no aim assist whatsoever when aiming in the direction of the strobe light. Anywhere further than this though, you will still have that aim assist active. And once again, this was a very reasonable change in my opinion. If you're outside of shotgun range, you still get aim assist against that shotgun user, but if you get up close and personal, he still gains those advantages from his operator mod. And overall, I think both of these changes to the strobe light were quite good. They didn't take it overboard, they didn't nerf it into oblivion. It's still a useful operator mod, but it's not nearly as debilitating as it was before this update. So I think it's in a good place, but of course, I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about that in the comment section below. So like I said, those are all of the weapon changes that happened with this update. Let's start going through some of the other changes. For attachments, Grip 2 got reduced flinch mitigation. So now you will flinch a little bit more than before if you're using that Grip 2 attachment. For specialists with Ajax, the 9-bang's flash effect had a reduced duration by 20%, which is a pretty big nerf to the 9-bang. Also, it's now countered more effectively by Tac Mask, and there's more that went on with Tac Mask that we'll talk about in a little bit. Also with Ajax, they reduced your accuracy while fortified with the shield, so you can no longer pick people off at quite a long range with that. You gotta be pretty much up close and personal to effectively get kills while fortified with Ajax. And they also made it now so concussion grenades actually work properly against an Ajax that's using a fortified shield, so he won't be able to turn as effectively. In addition to that, a relatively subtle change, but this might actually help you quite a bit in game, is they added a third-person sound effect for charges 2 and 3 of the 9-bang. So if you're around the corner from an Ajax user and he starts charging up that 9-bang, you will actually be able to hear him charging that 9-bang, and then you can react accordingly. So you might want to try and run away or jump around a corner or something like that because you'll know that a 9-bang is coming. As for Profit, they improved the Tempest's accuracy, and they also fixed a bug where if you had been hit by a Tempest and you were crawling around on the ground, pre-patch, there was a bug where if an explosion went off near you, it would actually cancel out that effect so you could stand up and be back in the fight. That's no longer the case, that bug will no longer occur. For Firebreak, they fixed a bug with the Purifier where it simply wasn't working against the strike team. It was actually kind of funny. Somebody posted a video on Reddit of them using a Purifier against the strike team member, and the strike team member was reacting and it looked like he was being burned, but it wasn't actually damaging him at all. So now strike team will take damage from a Purifier. And they also fixed a bug with Ruin where sometimes the grapple gun would fail to connect to certain surfaces when the player was moving and trying to use the grapple gun. For score streaks, there was a relatively minor change. Teams can now only have one strike team active at any given time, Whereas before, I've seen many strike teams up at once, which was way too powerful and impossible to counter if you're on the other team, or nearly impossible to counter. And finally, at least for multiplayer, we had a bunch of adjustments to the perks. Now, within the scope of this video, I can't cover all of these in great detail, but many of these do require their own videos, so I will be doing some videos within the next week or so, taking a deep look at the changes that were made with this update to these perks. But for now, I'll basically just read off what the patch notes are telling us. With Tactical Mask, they increased the resistance to 9-bang, concussion grenades, as well as razor wire. With Flak Jacket, they increased the resistance to explosive damage, which is good because it felt like Flak Jacket just didn't really work before. With Cold Blooded, which is a perk that I broke down a couple days ago and found out that it wasn't very good, they increased the delay period before the enemy AI will target you, which is really nice to see, and I'm looking forward to breaking that down into greater detail. And with Dead Silence, you will now suppress player sounds relating to healing, taking fall damage, and surfacing from swimming, which is a really good update. And keep in mind with this applies to both multiplayer as well as Blackout. So those are all the most important changes that were made to Black Ops 4's multiplayer. With zombies, I'm not a zombies channel, I'm not going to be touching that, but just know there was a ridiculous amount of zombie stuff mentioned in this, mainly stability improvements. So there should be far fewer blue screens in zombies, a bunch of other minor bug fixes as well. So if you guys are really into zombies, of course, check those patch notes out for yourself, because I'm not going to be covering them here. One more really big thing that I wanted to mention here, and this relates to Blackout, and I actually noticed quite a big difference with this, is items will now spawn in faster when you first drop in on the map. Before this update, a lot of times you would land and you'd be running all over the place and you wouldn't see any loot on the ground, and it would just take a while for that loot to load in. Now I've noticed by the time I hit the ground, for the most part at least, that loot has loaded in. There's still a few little bugs here and there where sometimes the loot doesn't load in immediately, but it is significantly improved, and this is actually a really big deal to me in Blackout. Also, another change that was made to Nomad's character mission is before this update, you had to kill 3 specialist players. So it had to be players that were using a specialist character, and then you had to have the item in your inventory at the end of the game. They decided to adjust that, so it's just kill 3 players. It can be any 3 players now. They don't have to be wearing a specialist outfit, which I think is awesome because that challenge had nothing to do with your skill level, really. It relied entirely on what the enemies were wearing when you ran into them, which I found to be a little ridiculous. So, Nomad's challenge will be much easier now than it was before. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on the huge update that we got yesterday. Just like with all my update videos, I'd love to know in the comment section below, what are you guys thinking about this update? Do you think it was really good overall? Not so good? Were you hoping they were going to do something else that they didn't do within this update? Just let me know what you guys are thinking down below. Personally, I think overall this was an amazing update, a lot of great changes. Obviously, not every little thing that I wanted changed, but especially with like the SMGs, for instance, I think it was a huge step in the right direction. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.